Thanks for making the Locked On Ole Miss podcast your first listen every day. We're free and available wherever you get your podcast, including YouTube. Do us a favor, subscribe to YouTube, hit the bell for notifications, comment, upvote as well. We'd appreciate it. Join our Subtext community. The link for that is in the description as well. I'm Stephen Willis. This is the Locked On Ole Miss podcast. I'm here with John Macon Gillespie of the Grove Report. We're going to talk a little Ole Miss sports because we like talking Ole Miss sports, and we hope you like hearing about Ole Miss sports. How you doing, John?
I'm doing good. How are you, Stephen?
I'm doing quite well. I spent last week campaigning and railing over the potential one permanent rival and the 8-9 game. We haven't talked to you since that started. What's your opinion on the 8 or 9 game schedule that they had?
I think you and I kind of see this the same way. The 8 or 9 game schedule on the surface doesn't necessarily matter to me, but I do think that they call them secondary rivalries, these second rivalry games that I think in the conference need to be protected. I mean, in Ole Miss's case, it would be LSU. And you and I think are on the same page there that there's a lot of history there, spanning decades and decades that, doesn't need to be lost. I mean, that needs to stay an annual matchup. But then you also have, like Auburn and Georgia. I mean, that could be a game that could be axed. A bunch of different games like that. And, I'm afraid that we're moving away from that in the Southeastern Conference, which as a traditionalist in a lot of respects when it comes to college football, I don't like that because, there are bigger rival. I mean, there are other rivalries in the conference other than the Egg Bowl, other than the Iron Bowl. So, I mean, it's things like that I think need to be protected that help make the conference and the sport what it is. And, I'm worried that we may be moving away from that.
Yeah, I just don't want LSU to become, for Ole Miss fans, what Tennessee has become. Because if you're my age or older, you do not like Tennessee. That game meant something to you because you played every year until Arkansas and South Carolina came into the conference. And then you've played them like 3 or 4 times since then. And that game has just become another football game. But that LSU game, that is the crystal ball. If we want to look in the future, that's what that game will look like if we allow them to get rid of it to even where it's an every other year type situation. If it means just as much when we play LSU as it does when we play South Carolina, that's a problem.
Yeah, I mean, and one, for geographical proximity, but two, the history of the rivalry, right? Because, I mean, this is even before our time, but I'm talking like Johnny Vaught era stuff. Those games they meant something on a national scale, pretty much year in and year out. And then, that kind of, I don't know if hatred is the right word, that rivalry though, stayed intact even with that animosity through, today. And that game may mean more to Ole Miss fans than it does to LSU. I mean, I don't necessarily know that, but I do think that it's a traditional game. It's a game that I think everyone looks forward to every year just because of the fan bases and, the tailgating scenes and all that kind of stuff. And, it's something that I think really needs to be held on to. And obviously we're talking about Ole Miss here, but I think pretty much every other school in the conference is in the same boat. I mean, with some other rival other than their one on Thanksgiving weekend.
Yeah, if South Carolina, for instance, lost Georgia, which that's a secondary game, they wouldn't have an SEC rival. It was that Missouri game, the Kentucky game. I mean, they're in a weird, precarious situation to where secondary rivalries would kind of put them on an island a little bit. But I will say this about LSU. You mentioned you don't know if LSU views Ole Miss as a rival. They love to say they don't, obviously. But every time Ole Miss is good and we win and they beat Ole Miss in Tiger Stadium, they storm the field. So one side does not kind of correlate to the other on that one. You can talk all you want about how that doesn't matter, then don't storm the field in a situation like that. So
Yeah.
Let's change the subject real quick. Over on the right side, there's some list of headlines that are up on the Grove Report right now. You can check out a Mercer preview. But the second one I'm interested in, you're starting to see some Heisman buzz hit up nationally on Quinshon Judkins. Now, he is, in my opinion, he is the best running back in the country. Blake Corum is coming off of an injury. He's the only one that you could probably whisper in the same breath about those two, maybe Rocket Sanders. But a running back Heisman candidate, this isn't 1997. Do you think that Quinshon actually has a chance to win that award?
I think he would have to have an ungodly season, I think, because the Heisman has turned in, like you said, this isn't the 90s. The Heisman has turned into a quarterback award for the most part. I mean, I think it would be kind of foolish to say otherwise. But, I mean, technically anybody can win it, obviously. But, yeah, the quarterbacks in today's game, they get the headlines and in the modern style of offense, I mean, they run the show. So I think it would be very difficult for him to do it. Now, does that mean he won't have a Heisman worthy season? No. I think he could definitely have a Heisman worthy season, but I think it would take something incredibly special for him or another running back maybe to win it, just because of the nature of the Heisman Trophy now.
What is it, Johnny Carson used to do? Was that Karnak? Was that the name with the envelope? Where he
Yeah,
he did that. And whenever I look in the crystal ball and it's like, hey, the envelope question would be like, what type of season would Ole Miss's offense have? I honestly think Quinshon's going to be somewhere around 11 or 1,200 yards. Statistically, it's going to look like it's a lesser year, but from what he's going to be asked to do, he might have a more effective season. He might be more of a weapon than he was last year. And the wide receivers on the outside, this offense has a chance to be. I've done two or three podcasts on it at this point. Has a chance to be the most explosive offense in school history and be up there in SEC history. Now they have to execute, but the pieces are in place.
yeah, and I mean Judkins is a very large part of that, right? I mean, and just because he doesn't hit maybe 1,500 yards or whatever the mark is, doesn't mean, like you said, he doesn't have an effective season or a more effective season than he had a year ago. Um, just because of the pieces in place and the way the offense will be structured.
Yeah, it should be very, very interesting. Now, when you look at the two wide receivers, now we have two out of the three first team Conference USA all conference players from a year ago, and Zakhari Franklin and Trey Harris. They are both contested catches receivers. They are nearly 50% both of them on contested catches, which is absolutely unheard of. Now, I did a show yesterday on how Zakhari Franklin actually helps Jackson Dart.
Mm-hmm.
And this is my point. They are ball winners. These are two type players that when Jackson throws the ball over the middle, maybe his confidence goes up just a little bit, but you can count on those guys to go up and get the football. What do you think about that?
Yeah, I think that's definitely the case because I think the talk at times, with the wide receiver room is, yes, who can separate, but yes, who can go up and get the ball, right? And I know that you've talked a lot about Jackson's use of the middle of the field and having guys like that who can make those 50-50 catches. I mean, that from a quarterback perspective, that's a positive, right? Because that is going to give you more confidence to distribute the ball over the middle of the field or wherever they may be. So yeah, I think that's totally accurate. And I thought that was a really good spin, not necessarily spin, but I thought that was a really good angle that you took on that with, okay, how does Franklin's commitment impact Jackson Dart and the quarterback competition? That's because I think a lot of people will look at it as, okay, cool, a good wide receiver, but they don't think of it as, okay, how does this help the quarterback actually? So I thought that was a good angle.
Yeah, in my opinion, Lane Kiffin and bringing Trey Harris in and bringing Zakhari Franklin in my mind, I think he did that for Jackson. He needed to get to where he needed to be, and you couldn't necessarily get Jackson over a certain level in the middle of the field, or maybe there was some kind of mental block. There had to be some special brought in from the outside, and then you have the Caden Priestcorn and you have Michael Trigg, which I don't know about. I'm going to ask you about this one too, because it's been a while since we talked. I think
Mhm.
Ole Miss is going to run a little bit of 12 personnel this year, and you're going to see Michael Trigg line up where a slot receiver normally would.
Yeah, no, I think that that's probably a good assumption. Obviously, I'm not in the team meetings or coaching meetings or anything like that, but just the way the roster sets up right now, I mean, get your best guys on the field. kind of. I mean, that's a very simple mentality, but yeah, I mean, line him up there, and because with him and Prescorn, on the roster, I think that's something that some people may overlook a little bit coming into the year. That could be pretty impactful. So yeah, I think that's a pretty good assumption on your part.
Yeah, with Prescorn, you have Trigg, and they're doing 12 personnel, but you also have the running back that is obviously, we saw in the spring game, is going to be a receiving threat this year.
Mm-hmm.
So they're going to be doing things within their scheme that's a little bit different. So I'm pretty fired up about that. Anyway, thanks for making the Locked On Ole Miss podcast your first listen every day. Every day is tomorrow on the show. Mike Huseman is going to come on and give us his expert transfer portal recap on Ole Miss's class. He's the transfer portal czar. He's here to talk all about that. So we're going to talk about that tomorrow. John, thank you very much for stopping by, man. It's always a good time.
Always a pleasure, Stephen. Thank you.
All right. Take care, bud.